The fog rolled in like a slow breath over the hills of Mendocino as Mahershala Ali's car wound down the narrow road. He had been driving along the coast after wrapping a film shoot, seeking solitude, chasing silence. That's when he saw it, a faded wooden sign nailed to a post, reading, "The Library Without Names, one day only." Below it, a hand-drawn arrow pointed toward a gravel path veering off into a grove of eucalyptus trees. Curiosity gnawed at him. He pulled over. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as he followed the path. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the mist made the woods seem timeless. Then, like something conjured out of a dream, the library appeared, a horse-drawn caravan with open walls, stacked high with books in wooden shelves that looked carved by hand. Strings of tiny golden lights blinked gently from the beams, like fireflies frozen mid-flight. A woman with silver braids sat behind a narrow desk at the entrance, her hands resting on a massive guest book. She looked up, her eyes twinkling with quiet recognition. "Welcome," she said. "You'll find what you didn't know you were looking for." Mahershala nodded politely but remained skeptical. He wandered in, brushing his fingers over spines of leather, canvas, and brittle paper. The books were worn but lovingly cared for, and none, not a single one, had an author's name. No biographies on the back covers, no dedications, no acknowledgments. It felt wrong, or sacred, he wasn't sure which. Then he pulled out a thin forest green volume from a shelf tucked beneath a hanging fern. There was no title on the cover, just a delicate gold-embossed feather. When he opened it, the pages creaked. And then the world shifted. It wasn't fiction. The first few pages were almost word-for-word stories his grandmother had told him as a child, about growing up in the South during the 1930s, about picking pecans in silence so she could hear her father's footsteps coming home, about the boy she'd once loved but lost when he was sent away for reasons no one ever dared to explain. Mahershala's hands trembled. The final chapters, he didn't recognize them. His grandmother had never told him how her story ended. She had grown quiet in her last years, whispering that some stories finish themselves and others are left for someone else to carry. He turned to the silver-braided woman, his voice low. "Where did this book come from?" Her smile was neither confirming nor denying. "From where all forgotten stories wait to be remembered." Mahershala sat on a nearby bench, the book heavy in his lap. Outside, the mist thinned, revealing an old oak tree just beyond the caravan, its branches low like it had been listening for a very long time. And so he began to read aloud. The fog had thinned to a light veil by the time Mahershala finished reading the first half of the book. He closed it gently as if afraid the story might vanish if mishandled. Around him, the library remained still, quiet as a held breath. Even the woman at the entrance had disappeared, as if giving him space to wrestle with what he'd found. The story etched in the pages wasn't just like his grandmother's life. It was her life. He remembered her stories vividly, how she used to braid his hair as a boy and talk softly about her past, a creaky porch in Mississippi, the night her brother vanished without a word, and the piano she learned to play with fingers too small to reach an octave. But this book filled in the silences she'd always tiptoed around. It mentioned names she never said, events she never told, and most startlingly, a man named Elijah, a name he had never heard from her lips. Mahershala turned the pages slowly now, entering uncharted ground. The book described letters, dozens of them tucked inside jars and buried beneath a dogwood tree. Letters to Elijah. Letters his grandmother wrote every year after he left, never mailed, never read. The last one ended with a line that gave him chills. "If someone finds these words, let them know I never forgot. Even the silence has a voice." He looked up, heart pounding. The book wasn't fiction. It couldn't be. Driven by something deeper than curiosity, Mahershala thanked the empty library under his breath, wrapped the green book in his scarf, and left. He climbed back into his car and drove straight to the small Mississippi town where his grandmother was born, something he hadn't done since her funeral 10 years ago. He arrived in the early evening. The sun cast long shadows over rusting fences and empty dirt roads. He found the old house still standing, though it leaned slightly like an old man trying to remember something. A woman across the street, sitting on a folding chair beneath a tattered umbrella, looked up as he approached. "You her grandson?" she asked without preamble. Mahershala nodded, surprised. "You knew her?" "I knew of her," the woman said, squinting. "Quiet lady. Played piano in the church. Used to sit under that dogwood tree every Sunday with a jar in her lap. Never said what was in it." Mahershala's pulse kicked up. "Do you know if the tree's still there?" The woman pointed with her chin. "Backyard." The dogwood tree had grown wider, thicker than the old photos he remembered. Mahershala dropped to his knees beneath it, gently clearing away dead leaves and overgrown grass until he saw a flash of rusted metal, a buried tin box. His fingers trembled as he pried it open. Inside were letters, yellowed and water-stained, wrapped in a piece of linen embroidered with her initials. M.L. He opened one. The date at the top read August 12, 1948. The words inside were heartbreak in cursive. Apologies, promises, hope. Each letter bore the name Elijah at the top and ended with, "Forever yours, May." But the last letter was different. It was dated much later, 1985, and addressed not to Elijah but to someone unnamed. If you find these, it means the story didn't end with me. Please finish it. Please remember it. M. Mahershala sat there for a long time as the sky darkened, reading the words of a woman who had never stopped loving someone lost to time. It wasn't just a story now, it was a responsibility, a legacy. He took the letters, the green book, and his heart full of questions back to the only place that might still hold answers, the library without names. But when he returned to the grove the next day, the caravan was gone. Nothing remained but a bare clearing and a single, freshly bound book on the ground, its spine dark green, its title finally revealed in gold, The Voice of Silence, by May L. and another. His fingers brushed the cover, and for the first time, Mahershala knew what he had to do. The journey back to Los Angeles felt different this time. Mahershala kept the green book in the seat beside him like a passenger, his grandmother's voice, her spirit, suddenly louder than ever in his life. The letters tucked carefully in a folder now felt like a mission. Not memorabilia, not relics. They were unfinished history. Once home, Mahershala cleared out the guest room in his house, set up a wide oak desk by the window, and began rereading everything. The green book, the found letters, his own memories. Every passage whispered a thread of a story he hadn't fully understood as a child, a life of sacrifice, of secrets kept to protect a love that had no place in its time. His grandmother, May, had loved a man named Elijah, not just in youth, but for a lifetime. From bits of the letters and details buried between lines, Mahershala realized Elijah hadn't disappeared completely. One letter mentioned a job in Chicago. Another spoke of a music teacher who still wore his father's smile. In one letter dated 1963, she wrote, "They say he walks the edge of Lincoln Park now, listening to the lake talk back." A clue. Mahershala flew to Chicago. There, in a retirement home nestled near the edge of Lincoln Park, he found a man named Elijah Thomas, age 93. A quiet man, a man who still played piano for the residents on Wednesdays. When Mahershala walked into the common room and introduced himself, Elijah paused only briefly, his fingers resting on the ivory keys as if they, too, had just heard a ghost speak. "Elijah Thomas," Mahershala said gently. "Did you know a woman named May L.?" Elijah didn't answer right away, but his eyes, clouded with age, glistened with something deeper. "She braided her hair with lilac stems in the spring," he said softly. "She laughed in chords, not notes." Mahershala sat down, heart thudding. "I have her letters," he said, "in a story she never got to finish." They sat together for hours, unfolding history like a map. Elijah hadn't left out of abandonment. He'd fled because of violence, because neighbors had burned their porch after a letter he wrote May was intercepted, because her family, pressured by whispers and fear, asked him never to return. He had obeyed, out of love, but he had never stopped writing. May had never received his letters. A silence had swallowed two lives whole. And yet, across decades, they had each continued the conversation alone. She under the dogwood, he by the lake. Mahershala listened, wrote, recorded. With Elijah's permission, he turned their story into a documentary called The Voice of Silence. It premiered a year later at a small film festival in Santa Fe, not with red carpets or blinding lights, but with an audience filled with people who had stories of their own. Letters never sent, words never said. In that theater, silence had a voice again. As the credits rolled, Mahershala returned to the stage, holding the green book now republished with both names on the cover. May L. and Elijah T., no longer anonymous, no longer forgotten. He said, "This isn't just a love story. It's a reminder. The stories we don't tell are often the ones we need most." After the screening, people stayed. They asked questions. They shared. Some even brought old letters they'd kept hidden, now willing to let them breathe. Months later, Mahershala received a package in the mail, an invitation from the library without names, this time with a return address. It was a caravan traveling across the country again, collecting stories that had fallen through the cracks, and they wanted him to come, not just as an actor, but as an author. That fall, Mahershala joined the library. He sat in the caravan under a ceiling of string lights and listened to strangers tell their truths. Stories unfinished, stories denied, stories passed down in whispers. And with every tale he helped preserve, he thought of May and Elijah. whose silence had made all this possible. And in that quiet library with no authors listed, no shelves labeled, no rules spoken, Mahershala Ali found his loudest role yet. If this story stirred something in your heart, don't let silence keep our stories buried. Like the video to support voices that were never heard. Comment below, have you ever discovered a secret in your family's past? Subscribe for more untold, powerful journeys featuring the faces you know and the truths you've never heard. And remember, sometimes the quietest books hold the loudest truths